Hello everybody, welcome back to our regular Facebook Live. It's week 5, so that means that next week is the final week of our 6-week session. My name's Clare Watson. I'm one of the lactation consultants, IBCLCs at Nutrition and Nurture. So this week we are going to have a look at how to tell whether breastfeeding is going well. We're going to have a look at hand expressing, and we're going to have a bit of a chat about growth spurts. So if you have any questions about any of those topics, pop them below. I'll have a look at the end and see if we can do some answers if we haven't answered already. All right, lovely. So let me share my screen and we can get started. All right, so when we're trying to tell whether breastfeeding is going well, I think this is probably one of the most common sort of questions that we get. I know Gemma was asking about it last week. So hi Gemma, if you're here, hopefully this should answer your question. It's one of the most common things that we get asked about. How do you know how much they're getting, if they're getting enough, how to tell if it's going well? And I think the idea that people have in their heads is that you just can't tell with breastfeeding. You just can't tell. But that's not quite true. We can actually get quite an accurate picture of what's going on, but we need to look at a holistic picture of your baby. We can't just look at one thing on its own. We haven't got numbers. We have to look at a whole picture, and from that we can pick out whether things are going well or whether there's something that just needs a little bit of attention, a little bit of tweaking. So you can see on the screen here, these are some of the things that we might want to consider, and I thought we'd have a bit of a chat about those so that you feel fairly confident with them. So the first thing, and I think it's probably the thing that people know about most, is the weight gain. So is your baby putting on enough weight? That's one really good way to tell if they're getting enough milk, isn't it? Are they growing? Possibly slightly more difficult in current circumstances because we're having reduced face-to-face contact with medical professionals and families. Obviously, the babies are getting weighed slightly less often, and I think that's increasing some anxiety for some families. But I'm here to kind of reassure you on that one. The health visitors and the midwives are very much open for business. If you are concerned about your baby, they will help you, and they will come out and arrange either to drop some scales off so you can weigh yourself or they can weigh the baby. So there are systems in place for dealing with that if you are genuinely concerned. But hopefully looking at this holistic picture will give you an idea about whether you should be concerned, whether there is some clear signs that there's something to be concerned about, something that needs looking at. All right, so another thing that people have asked me about quite a lot recently is whether they can use their bathroom scales to weigh the baby. And I would say, particularly with young babies, that's really not a great idea. It can be quite misleading. So bathroom scales, kind of at the very best, are usually accurate to around sort of 50 grams. My baby weighing scales are accurate to 2 grams. So that shows you a bit of the difference. And what we're looking at is after the first sort of 5 days, we're looking at babies putting on between sort of 20 to 40 grams per day in the early days. So if you've got some scales which are only accurate to 50 grams, you can see that that might cause, you could be a whole day's weight gain out. So not necessarily a good idea. Much better to look at this holistic picture. When we're talking about weight gain with babies, in the early days, so we usually weigh them about day 5, and that is still taking place. And at about day 5, we would have expected that there would have been some weight loss. So it's very normal for a baby at their first weigh-in to have had some weight loss. And it's actually normal to have up to 10% weight loss. Most hospitals, after about an 8% loss, so between 8 and 10% loss, they might pop in just a little bit of extra observation, a little bit of extra support, just to keep a close eye to make sure that is okay and that baby's reached the very lowest and that they're then heading up again. So that's not unusual, but it's not because they're not allowed to lose that amount of weight. It's merely just to put something in place. Beyond 10%, things need looking at, really. You need to have a good feeding assessment done and try and figure out what's going on. But again, it could be that nothing is going on. It could be you had lots of fluids during labour, something like that, which is impacting on the accuracy of the weights and reflected in that weight loss. So it's sometimes quite a complex picture. So again, even in those circumstances, we wouldn't just look at the weight gain on its own, we would look at this whole picture to see whether it's something we need to be concerned about, or whether it's something we can just monitor, or whether it's something, a sign that it's all going really, really well. So after that weight loss, we would then expect these very tiny babies to be putting on between sort of 20 and 40 grams a day. So no further weight loss, and just putting on this regular kind of amount in those early weeks. And then after that point, you'll start to see it being plotted on a graph. Some hospitals and some areas are still using physical red books. Others have switched to more of an online system. But if you have one, show you, the graph usually looks something like this. So we've got a number of red lines, which we call the centile lines, and you can see that's the 2nd, 9th, 25th, 50th, 75th. And then we would plot baby's weight against their age, and we can then get a picture of how things are changing over time. Your baby is not going to follow one of those lines exactly. That's not the plan at all. They definitely kind of wiggle around. So if you look at that green line that's been plotted there, these are fake, by the way, they don't really exist. But that green line shows that this baby is kind of bouncing around between the sort of the 91st and 98th lines. And that could be totally normal. So sometimes they're putting on weight quite quickly, and then they have a bit of a static bit, and then they put on weight quite quickly again. And as long as they're kind of bouncing around in that kind of area, and as long as all the other signs were good, we probably wouldn't be too concerned about that. If you have a look at the baby with the red line, though, again, fake baby doesn't exist. But you can see that they had that initial weight loss at the beginning. They then got back to birth weight, which was brilliant, really good at that 2-week point. And then you can see that the baby has continued to put on weight, but they kind of went from the 50th, then they went to the 25th centile, and then they went to the 9th centile, and eventually down to the 2nd centile. That wouldn't be such a good pattern. Now, clearly with this baby, when it got down to about that level, something was put in place, and we've then gone back up, and we're bouncing around between the 2nd and 9th. So that would be the kind of the latter part of that graph would be great. That would be fine. But the first part where they're crossing more than 2 lines, that would be sparking some things in me, certainly, and in the health visitors and things like that, to say, I think we need to look at this a bit more closely. So you would want to get a good feeding assessment done, and thinking about any medical implications as well, just to make sure everything's absolutely fine. Again, could be totally fine, could just need a tiny tweak of something, but we just want to be on the safe side with that. So I think that's pretty much it with weight, but I would say look at other signs of weight gain as well. So is the baby nice and chubby? Have we got some really good fat pads in the cheeks? We want to see that, and nice rolls on their arms and legs. Do they grow out of their clothes really often? They're the kinds of things that you can look for at home. But if you do have concerns, talk to somebody about it. Tell them from our list that we're looking at what symptoms you've noticed, what you've noticed, and then they can help you get something popped in place. So the next thing that's a really, really key sign about whether it's going well is, I'm going to stop sharing for a moment while I share some really nice nappies. So please, if you're eating, maybe look away now. These are real. I have faked these for this circumstance. Okay, so when we're talking about nappies, we're looking at wet and dirty nappies, and they're a really key indicator, particularly the poo. Let's look at the poo first. So on the very first day, we're looking for at least one poo passed. When we're talking berries, we're talking kind of at least the size of a £2 coin. And that first stool, lovely, we call meconium. It's quite black and sticky and tarry. It's quite hard to get off, a bit like treacle. Okay, so that's what we'll be looking for in that first 24 hours. Second 24 hours, you probably get 2 of those at least, We're looking for a minimum of 2. And then from then on, we're looking for at least 2 poos every day to show us good milk intake. That poo is going to start changing though. So that meconium, that first poo, once that starts to pass and once the milk starts coming more into the system, we start to transition to a more kind of transitional still, which could be quite greeny, just a bit looser, can start to get a little bit more seedy. So yeah, that would maybe happen around sort of day 3-ish. And then we would hope to be looking at a more mature poo, a more mature stool by around day 5. And that would be much yellowier, quite runny. This one's quite pasty, sometimes quite pasty, but some of them can be really quite runny, kind of curry sauce, korma sauce kind of thing. And again, you can have those kind of seedy things in, but we're looking for at least 2 every day. If your young baby isn't pooing at least twice every 24 hours, please get somebody to have a look at a feed and to see if there's something we can tweak. It really isn't normal, and the stool, the poo, is one of the best indicators we have in those early days. All right, so up to about kind of around 5-6 weeks-ish, really key indicator for us. The wet nappies are also useful to know about, but they're slightly less reliable in the very early days because it can be impacted by so many different things. Again, the fluids during labor, that kind of thing, the baby passing that out, it's not necessarily an indication of the milk that they're taking in. It could be other things, but we'd be looking for at least 1 wet nappy, good heavy wet nappy on that first day, at least 2 on the second day, at least 3 on the third, at least 4 on the fourth, at least 5 on the 5th, and at least 6 on the 6th. And going forwards, at least 6 wet nappies every day. And that way we would expect to be quite light coloured, not strong smelling, not looking orangey and concentrated. Sometimes you can see like a little bit of almost a readiness, a brick dust kind of thing in those nappies that we call urates. In the first 24-ish hours, that can be normal. So let your midwife know, but don't worry about it. If you get a number of those later on down the line, though, that is something to bring up with somebody pretty swiftly and just get someone to check that everything else is looking okay. So yeah, nice. I think one of the problems that people report to me is it's quite hard to tell if the nappies are wet, because sometimes the nappies nowadays are so absorbent that you just can't tell. So a little trick could be to take a clean nappy, pour a couple of tablespoons of water on, and then weigh it. And that way you know what to expect. Another way is just to pop a little bit of dry cotton wool into the nappy, and again that's easier to spot whether it's wet or not. So yeah, little hints and tips there. But those poos, those nappies, really important. You don't necessarily need to keep a note of how many times and how long baby is feeding for. That's not always that helpful, but do write down when they have a wet and dirty nappy. Everybody's going to ask you, and write down what it looks like as well. You're going to be fascinated by it. But yeah, take a notebook with you to the hospital so you can start it straight away, and yeah, write down wet and dirty nappies. It's so reassuring for you when you know that that's going well. So yeah, if stuff is coming out, it's pretty convincing that stuff must be going in. So good to go with that one. So the next thing that we look at might be the amount of feeding. I'm going to share my screen again. And for that, I just wanted to remind you about what we talked about last week, which was that babies go to the breast for many different reasons. So the amount that they are feeding is not always related to hunger. It could be any of these reasons. But if you have got a baby who is feeding really frequently for very short periods of time, it can be worth having that looked at, getting a good feeding assessment done, so somebody watch a whole feed to see what's going on, just in case there's a little tweak we can do to make it a bit more efficient, and make it a bit less hard work for the baby and for you, make it a bit more sustainable for you. And same with babies who are feeding for a long period of time. So if you've got a baby who feeds for at least an hour every feed, again, if you're being responsive, they're probably getting enough, but there may just be something we can do to make that a little bit easier on both of you. So yeah, look out for that. But if you remember from last week, and do have a look back if you missed it, but if you remember from last week that we are looking for a minimum of 8 feeds in 24 hours. Absolute minimum, much more likely to be getting 14, 16 feeds in 24 hours. Okay, so that's kind of the frequency and the length of the feeds that you might look at. I think it's a really important thing to think about is whether that feed is an active feed or not. So for some of these things, you don't need an active feed. If they want to go off to sleep, they might just want to suckle and not take too much milk, and that's not a problem at all. But for the feeds which you feel need to be active because they haven't fed for a while, or they're usually quite hungry at this point, we want to make sure that they are actively transferring that milk and actively swallowing it. It's totally possible for a baby to be at the breast and attached and look to be doing something, but not actually getting an awful lot of milk. So learning what the difference between a suck and a swallow looks like can be really helpful. We did have a question on this. It was Nissa, who was saying, everyone says my baby has a good latch and they can see him feeding, but he isn't gaining weight. What could be wrong? Obviously, you probably need a one-to-one consultation on that one, just to have a look at the background and what else could be going on. But one possible thing would be that the baby is at the breast but not actually feeding very effectively or efficiently. So I wanted to try and share with you a little video to show you the difference. So we haven't tried this before, so let's let's give it a go and see whether I can get into we're stuck, hang on. You can see what I look at all the time. Right, here we go. I'll just share with you this video. So this is a baby who is taking colostrum. And you see there's a couple of those where there's a little bit of almost a pause at the end. They're the swallows. So they're sucking. That's sucking. And then we might get a little bit of a pause. Let me just see if I can show you one of those pauses again. There. Okay, so with colostrum, that's not unusual because it's so thick, and it's not unusual for them to do quite a lot of sucking for every swallow for some babies, but we wouldn't want that really going on beyond the first day or two, sort of 24 hours-ish, really. What we want is something a bit more like this one. You see that it's much more rhythmical and slower on that one, and you can see there's almost that pause as the chin drops and extra bits. Instead of just a small nom 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 action, it's a big and you've got to swallow in that one pretty much every suck. So here is the opposite of that. Quite small movements. The baby's attached and it's obviously doing something, but this baby isn't swallowing an awful lot of milk. If you compare it to this one, I think you should be able to see the difference quite well. You see big jaw movements and kind of flow. You can almost see the milk flowing to the back in those big swallows. That's what we're looking for. That's proper swallowing at the breast, and we'd want a good amount of that at the start of a feed, once the letdowns happened, once your milk has started to flow. So I think there's just one more little bit of a comparison so you can see that, and I'll pop a link to this below this session. So this first one it's being active, but they're quite quick sucks and there's not that kind of pause. So that's a baby who's sucking but not swallowing so much. This is a baby who's doing lots of lovely swallows. Nice. Okay, so I hope that helps you. Like I say, I'll pop a link so you can see, but that's a really important thing. So at the beginning of a feed, we'd expect some of those quick sucks going on while they trigger the oxytocin to flow, if you remember, and it's that oxytocin that squeezes those grapes and helps the milk to start flowing. Once that milk starts flowing, you would expect to see those quick sucks changing to bigger gulps, more rhythmical with swallowing. So we'd expect either swallow, 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 or suck, swallow, suck, swallow, suck, swallow in a nice rhythm. And that would go on, you know, a good sort of 5-10 minutes. It depends on the baby, but we would expect a good chunk of that at the start of the feed. And then as the baby gets fuller and the milk becomes richer and fattier, throughout the feed, that might start to slow down a little bit, and we might get a bit more suck, suck, swallow, suck, suck, swallow, with some pauses in there. And then towards the very end of the feed, when baby's kind of milk drunk and floppy and just having pudding, basically, you might get a lot more of the suck, 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 swallow as they're drifting off to sleep. So that's what a normal pattern looks like, and definitely good to be familiar with what that, with how that looks. So the next key point is maternal comfort. You matter, and actually how you feel is a really good indication about whether breastfeeding's going well and whether baby's getting enough milk. So don't ignore any signs from you. What we'd be looking for is pain, basically. It's quite normal in the early days when baby first latches on and, you know, kind of go, when they first go on, it might feel a bit like, oh, hang on, what's going on here? A bit unusual and maybe a little bit tender. That would be quite normal. But if you counted to 10, that should disappear completely, and it should become completely comfortable after that point. If that pain and that discomfort, if you're curling your toes up throughout the feed, that's not right. If you remember those grape stalks where the milk flows, they are all coming out in the nipple. If they are getting squashed, which is what's causing you the pain, then that milk isn't going to be able to flow very well. So it's not just a case of pain for you, but that is a sign that the milk is probably not flowing very well. So get some support with it, have a look at the positioning, see if we can get it a bit more comfortable, get that nipple away from the gums, and away from the lips and kind of clamping on, and it'll be more comfortable for you and better for the baby. Definitely better to get help with it earlier rather than later. If we can get to you in the first 24 hours and do that little bit of a tweaking, that can make a difference for your journey. If you leave it until you can't bear it any longer, it's much harder to resolve. You know, you've probably had enough by that point, bless you. Okay. So yeah, your comfort is important. It's useful to look at the shape of your nipple after a feed. And if you can't see it properly, get somebody else just to have a little look for you. We would expect it to be roughly the same shape as it began, but longer. If it looks squashed, pinched, lipstick shaped, anything like that, that's a good sign that it's probably been in the wrong place in the baby's mouth somehow, and probably not transferring that milk. So yeah, look at your nipple. You shouldn't get any pinching or pain, or certainly not any bleeding, anything like that. It's a big red flag. Get some help. So I think that's probably it for your comfort, but put together with those other things, really very important. The other thing to consider is the baby's comfort and whether they're settled and happy. So as I said, we would expect throughout the feed that baby would be getting sleepier and sleepier and would eventually fall asleep at the breast. That is normal, and that is a good thing. You know, you've got a tool for sleep, use it. So they would fall asleep at the breast. Fantastic. If you then give them a cuddle, if they woke up quite quickly, you might then offer the other breast and let them have a little bit of a top off of that. Or if they were still really unsettled after that point and just kind of, yeah, not seeming that they had enough, you would keep going and you'd be thinking, oh, they're probably still quite hungry. If the baby is really settled on you and will sleep for a good couple of hours, then that's a good sign that your baby's getting enough and is comfortable, as long as all the other signs are there as well, obviously. I cannot promise that you will be able to transfer that baby into a cot and they will still sleep for that length. Them being unsettled when they're away from you isn't necessarily a sign that they're hungry. It's a sign that they don't want to be away from you. And that's very normal for our carrier mammal babies, unfortunately. Have a look at the 4th trimester and some of our earlier videos as well to kind of help you understand what that's all about. We also want a baby who, once they are attached at the breast, are happy and settled there, that they're not on and off and on and off and grizzling and not quite right. If they're on and off and on and off throughout the feed, that's a sign that you might need to just tweak something. And also, what can you hear? You might well be able to hear some audible gulping, and that's great. That's not a problem at all, but we don't want to be able to hear that kind of vacuum breaking, like a clicking noise. An occasional one, nothing to worry about. But if your baby is clicking quite a lot throughout the feed, that might be a sign that the breast isn't very stable in their mouth for whatever reason. And again, it's something to get looked at. So having a look at that kind of holistic picture and looking at all of those elements gives us such a good idea of whether it's going well and if that baby is getting enough, and flags up whether they're not. So yeah, that would be my top tip for that. The next thing we were going to talk about was hand expressing. And hand expressing is where you use your hand instead of the baby to get the milk from your breast, and it's an enormously useful tool. It can be used antenatally for some women. So we talk about antenatal colostrum harvesting. I know we've mentioned that before. And that is for women who might have something like gestational diabetes, where it's quite useful to have a little bit of a store of colostrum ready for when the baby's first born in case they just need a bit of a boost. But for most women, absolutely not necessary and not particularly helpful. So yeah, so hand expressing for that, it's very useful for colostrum, so that early milk, which is very thick and in small quantities. If you put a pump on at that point, quite often those golden drops get lost in the mechanism and you can't access it. Whereas hand expressing, we can get it out much more easily and keep a lot more of it. It's also very useful for times like I think Laura's going to talk about next week, if you've got blocked ducts or anything like that, or if you're out and about and can't be bothered to bring an electric pump with you. You've got a tool, it's free, it's easy, use it. Hand expressing is very, very useful, but it is a skill, and your body is different to everybody else's body. So you need to learn how your body works and what you respond to. But I wanted to talk through kind of the main sort of points with hand expressing. So thinking back to week 3, the first week that I did, where we talked about how the breasts work. And we talked about the oxytocin squeezing those muscle cells around those grapes where the milk is made and squeezing that milk out. So when we're hand expressing, we're not pulling the milk out, you know, like you kind of visualize milking a cow. We're not pulling the milk out or anything like that. We need to kind of trick the body that there's a baby there and it needs to release the milk. So we're encouraging the body to release the milk. So it should be very gentle. There shouldn't be any pulling of the skin. You certainly shouldn't be any bruising or pain, anything like that. It can be absolutely skin touch, that kind of level. So you can see I'm not even pushing against my tissue. I'm just stroking the top. It can be that gentle and still quite effective. Okay, but again, experiment with your body. So the first thing we need to do is to raise up that oxytocin level. There are many ways of doing this. One of the most effective is to have your baby in skin to skin. So if your baby is there, have them in skin to skin with you, have a good snuggle and a sniff of their head, that nice bonding moment that will raise the oxytocin up and probably even, you know, if you're very full, start that milk flowing spontaneously. So yeah, that's a really useful way of raising up your oxytocin. If you're away from your baby for any reason, then having a photograph, something, clothes that smell of them, a little video, a sound clip, anything that kind of makes you go, oh, makes you feel gooey, because that gooiness is the oxytocin sort of flowing through you, and that's going to be really good. Being relaxed and comfortable with warm hands, not freezing ice cold hands, that can help an awful lot. So our bodies will only allow oxytocin to flow if they're not under stress. If they're under stress and the cortisol is flowing, it's kind of like a switch. It switches the oxytocin off. And in that situation, your milk isn't going to flow anywhere near as easily. There's lots of lovely meditation on YouTube and things like that, if that sort of thing is your bag. Just something just to take you away from maybe quite a stressful situation and allow you just to, okay, let the oxytocin flow, flip that switch, and you're more likely to find it easier to get the milk to flow. The other thing that gets milk to flow well is skin contact. So a gentle massage, so a gentle breast massage, and you can do that just by gently rolling between your hands. It's just almost think about waking the breast up, warming it up, saying, there's a baby here, look, there's its fingers, it's trying to get the milk, and you can visualize at the same time, you know, picture fountains of milk flowing, whatever works. So yeah, this gentle stroking down towards the nipple, just waking it up. Do a good sort of 5 minutes, 5-10 minutes of this gentle breast massage while you're relaxing and getting into the right situation. Just spending that little bit of time is well worth it, because you will help the letdown to happen, help that milk to start flowing, and then it becomes, you may even find that you start to get drops just happening just from the massage and the kind of thinking, the visualization side of it. Once you've warmed that breast up and you might have started to see some little droplets appear, then we help it. So we think about the kind of thumb and first finger being in line, in a straight line with the nipple, and we want to find the spot in your breast which is most effective, and it's going to be different for everybody, but we know that sort of around 65% of that milk making tissue is within 3 centimeters of the base of the nipple. So that seems like a really good area to try and stimulate, and we're not squeezing it out, we're not squashing those grapes, we're just triggering them a little bit. So yeah, you can sometimes feel where there's a change in texture. It might feel quite soft and silky at the base of the nipple, and you might, as you work back, you might be able to feel where there's a little bit of a change in texture. Don't worry if you can't, not everyone can. Think about where your baby's chin might be. For a lot of women, it's at the edge of the areola, but that doesn't work for everyone. It's experiment. Try it. See, does it work? If it works, you got the spot. If it isn't working, try somewhere else and try a little bit closer to the nipple, try a little bit further back, but keeping those fingers in a straight line. And then it's just kind of being rhythmical, just a squeeze, release, suck and swallow, suck and swallow, suck and swallow. And you'll start to see either dribbles of milk coming, or if you're a bit further on down the line, some women will then start to see spraying. And you want to be catching that in a clean container with probably quite a wide rim, because it can come out in lots of different directions. It's useful to be an octopus, so you can do more than one thing at once, or to have somebody to help you, perfect, but you can do it by yourself. If you're a bit weird about touching your own breasts, and that might make you feel stressed, get somebody else to do it. If you're more comfortable with somebody else giving you a massage, great, let them do it. That's not a problem at all. Whatever works. When the milk stops flowing, you can go back, have a bit more of a massage, rotate your hand around, try a different area. Your boobs are 360 degrees. We want to make sure that we're trying all the way around there. And you can mix it up. So a bit of massage, a bit of hand expressing, a bit of massage, a bit more hand expressing. You could bring in another finger or two if that helps. Just experiment, see what gets that milk to flow. But yeah, hand expressing, top skill, worth it. In some cultures where pumping with an electric pump is much less known, hand expressing, when they get really good at it, it's actually much quicker than an electric pump, and it's better for your milk supply, because that oxytocin flowing, we respond much better to skin contact and massage than we do to a bit of plastic stuck on you. All right. So yeah, that's, I don't think we had any. Oh yeah, Chloe had asked about, I'm trying to hand express and it just isn't working. Any tips? I would say oxytocin. Try and do that breast massage. Again, I'll pop a link to a really good video for you to have a look at, which is all about how to do that massage and the hand expressing. So yeah, have a look at that, Chloe. I'm sure that will help you get into the right kind of feel. So the last thing I wanted to talk about today is growth spurts. And let's think back to the screen that I shared earlier about all of those different reasons why a baby might go to the breast. It's not all about food and drink. And we know that the amount of milk that they take in 24 hours increases quite rapidly in the early days, in the first sort of 5 days or so, well, even longer than that. So it increases quite rapidly in the early period, and then it stays quite stable then up to around the 6-month mark. So they take in, roughly the same amount of milk all throughout that period, every 24 hours. And then once you start to introduce solids, it will very gradually taper off as the solids increase. But we know that throughout that period when it is exclusive breast milk, you're going to have times when they're feeding much more frequently and times when they'll feed less frequently. And sometimes you'll hear these referred to as growth spurts. And sometimes it's to do with growth, sometimes it's to do with development. They're learning something new. And if you remember, when they're learning something new, the oxytocin helps the new connections to be made in the brain, and the oxytocin flows best when they're not under stress, when they're in a safe place, and their safe place is your breasts. So that's why they want to spend a lot of time then. They may not even want to feed particularly, some babies just want the nipple next to their mouths for a period of time and not want to be away from you. They can be a bit unsettled when they're away from you and seem quite clingy. And just want to be really close. And yeah, like I said, we call these growth spurts. In the early days, they last sort of 24, maybe 48 hours. And as time goes on, they get a bit further apart, but they can also last a little bit longer. So the really common times for this to happen, and every baby is different, so I'm not promising this or threatening, but the really common times are within the first couple of days. So we talked about it before, like around the second night, third night, there might be a very intense period of feeding. At around 7 to 10 days is another key time. 2 to 3 weeks, 4 to 6 weeks, around the 3-month mark. Then around the 4-month mark, there's a big change developmentally going on. There's a lot of learning happening, and it's very common then for sleep to be quite unsettled. But that will pass as well. But yeah, you might hear it being called a sleep regression, but it's not the sleep that's regressing, it's the baby that's developing. So try and focus on the positives. They're learning something, they're maturing, they're becoming amazing, rather than thinking, oh my goodness. But yeah, and then at around 6 months, and then again at around 9 months, and there's maybe a little bit of separation anxiety coming in then. So it's really common during those times that babies will want to just be with you and will want to do some quite intensive feeding. Lots of different ways of dealing with this, but one way is just to give into it and just go, yeah, it's going to be one of those days. Settle yourself down with a box set on the sofa in your dressing gown, so you can keep them in skin to skin and they can just help themselves and crack on for 24 hours, and then you'll find it settles down again after that. So that's probably one of the most recommended ways of dealing with it. Baby wearing is enormously helpful at those times because you can keep them safe and close and even in skin to skin with you. And you can learn to feed in a sling or a carrier as well. Get on with things that you really want to sting. And I think this whole thing is about trusting a baby, that when they are asking for something, that they genuinely need it, and trusting your body that if everything is as normal, that your body will respond to those demands and can grow a baby. I mean, you grew it inside you, it would be a bit of a, you know, it's quite unusual if you then can't grow them when they come outside. But have a look at the 4th trimester information as well. That's always really interesting. So I'm just going to have a quick check to see whether we've had any particular questions. I can't see right now. And if not, I will leave you in peace for another week, and you can come back and see Laura next week. Yeah, no particular questions, so I'll leave you till next week. It's been a joy. Do catch up with the previous ones and join us next week for the final episode. Thank you very much.